My name is Jennifer Storm, and I am the appointed victim advocate for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We're here today to kick off a campaign in the Commonwealth that is going to acknowledge, inform, empower, and support crime victims in a way we never have before. Before I get into my remarks, I would like to acknowledge Senator Guy Rushenthaler and Representative Sheryl Delozier for being our prime sponsors for Marsy's Law. I also want to acknowledge all the amazing brave survivors, legislators, law enforcement, district attorneys, and affiliates that we have here today. I want to acknowledge the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape, the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association for supporting our efforts. Marsy's Law is a national movement to amend state constitutions to include provisions which provide specific protections for individual victims as their cases are adjudicated. Marsy's Law is named for Marsy Nicholas, who was killed by her boyfriend in 1983. A week after her murder, her mother was confronted by the accused at a grocery store. He was released on bail unknown to the family. Imagine their horror and trauma. Marsy's brother, Dr. Henry Nicholas, was outraged that such an injustice could occur and set out to change the constitutions of every state to ensure that no family ever had to endure the tragedy that they endured. Thus, Marsy's Law was born. I have to say that next to raising my hand to take the oath of office, this is the single most important day of my tenure as the victim advocate. Bringing Marsy's Law to Pennsylvania has been a goal of mine, and I'm so encouraged by the display of bipartisan support for this initiative. Currently, Pennsylvania is only one of 15 states that does not provide constitutional protections for crime victims. While the accused and convicted have numerous rights codified in the Constitution, crime victims only have statutory rights. This creates a significant imbalance in justice, because victims have no recourse when their rights are violated. Upon the successful completion of this campaign, I, along with my victim advocate colleagues, will never have to utter the phrase, "I am so sorry, but there's nothing else we can do for you," to a crime victim again. Most of you probably understand that when you're thrust into the justice system, there are many rights and services that come along with that process. Pennsylvania is home to, I believe, some of the best victim service providers in the country. For the offender, there are a litany of important constitutional rights to ensure a fair trial and representation. For the victim, there's statutory rights. We have good statutory rights. The problem is when you have a constitutional right and you have a statutory right, anytime something is challenged in court, that statutory right is going to collapse the constitutional right will collapse that statutory right every time. If those rights are violated for crime victims, we have no remedies. So we have rights without remedies. We, as a justice system, often add insult to injury time and time again when we don't enforce and protect the rights of crime victims. If a victim has failed to be notified of a court event, that court event goes on without them. If a victim is not informed that they have the right to restitution or to give a victim impact statement, which we've seen as of late in the Nassar case how vitally important the victim's voice is at sentencing, those events go on without them, without restitution being ordered, and without the voice of the victim being heard. When an offender's right is violated, there is legal recourse. They can file motions with the court and challenge things that impact their case. However, when a victim's right is violated, there is no legal recourse. There's no motion to file. I cannot tell you how often families have said to me that their offender has more rights than they do, and they do. And the frustrating part is that they're the ones that are harmed. They're the injured people coming into a system that should protect and serve them. And when it fails them, that violation feels sometimes just as worse as the actual crime itself. Today, we seek to change that. Marsy's Law will give victims standing in court. Marsy's Law does not give victim veto. It doesn't give authority over the accused. It doesn't trample on the rights of the accused. What it does is it elevates the existing rights that we have in law and it codifies them in our Constitution. By implementing Marsy's Law, we send a clear acknowledgement and understanding that in Pennsylvania, we value the rights of victims enough to enshrine them into our Constitution. I thank you so much for joining me today for this amazing initiative. I would like to now recognize the prime sponsor of Senate Bill 1011. Senator Guy Rushenthaler was elected to the state Senate in November 2015, winning a special election and was re-elected in November 2016 to serve a full 4-year term. He was raised in the South Hills of Pittsburgh. After law school, he joined the U.S. Navy Judge Advocate General Corps and volunteered for duty in Iraq, where he prosecuted nearly 100 terrorists and successfully defended a Navy SEAL falsely accused of misconduct. Stateside, he serves as an award-winning Navy lawyer before returning home to Pittsburgh. I'm very proud to have him as our prime sponsor of this initiative. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks. Well, thanks for coming out today. I just want to thank all the elected officials that we have coming out showing support for this bill. I truly believe that society is judged by how we treat the weakest and the most vulnerable members. And that's why I recently introduced Senate Bill 1011, which will begin the process of amending the state constitution to grant victims inherent rights in Pennsylvania. The language of the House and the Senate bill is the product of a collaborative effort that's taken place between the Pennsylvania District Attorney's Office, between victims' rights groups, and the national Marsy law movement. Marsy's law ensures that victims have the ability to be an integral part of the criminal justice system. Marsy's law will be a constitutional amendment that will be required for both criminal and juvenile court systems. It will enumerate rights of victims and make sure that their rights are protected no less vigorously than the rights afforded to the accused. Further, Marsy's law stipulates that crime victims will have the constitutional right to receive notice of all proceedings involving the accused, have the right to be heard in any proceedings in which they're implicated, the right of notice of any release or an escape of the accused in their case, the right to full and timely restitution, and I think most importantly, the right to confer with prosecutors during proceedings. Now, to date, Marsy's law has passed in 6 states, including our neighbor, Ohio, and efforts are currently underway in 10 other states, of course, Pennsylvania being one of them. But in Pennsylvania, this is going to be a multi-year process. The most common way to initiate a change in the state constitution is through a single subject amendment that is passed in 2 consecutive sessions of the General Assembly, and it will go on the ballot for a public referendum for the approval of the public. So it's important to note that Marsy's law will not infringe on any of the rights that currently exist for either the accused or the victims of crime. Those accused of crimes will continue to receive all the rights provided under the state constitution, as well as other laws. Victims will also continue to receive the same rights that they always have, but they'll have additional rights. And the rights that they currently have now will be stronger than ever before because they'll be on equal footing with those of the accused being in the Constitution. Pennsylvania already has a strong history of protecting victims of crime, but today we're starting the process of putting the victims, putting their rights on equal level with that of the accused. The passage of Marsy's law will ensure that crime victims in Pennsylvania are treated with respect, dignity, and fairness. I just want to say, as a former prosecutor, as a former defense attorney, a former district judge, I couldn't be more proud of this legislation and of everybody coming to support it. So thank you so much for being here. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker was to be Christy Lane. Unfortunately, she is unable to be here with us today, but I am going to share a little bit about her story because it is quite germane to why we're standing here. Christy was 13 years old when she and her sister were sitting in a vehicle that was being driven by her mother and her grandmother when her father came to the door and unloaded 16 shots from a shotgun into the car, killing both her mother and her grandmother in front of her. Christy knew her father was going to kill her mother because he had indicated such to the girls on numerous occasions during a pretty visceral custody battle. She desperately wanted to testify at trial. Unfortunately, at that time, the district attorney in that county did not allow her to testify, thought it would be too traumatizing for a 13-year-old to take the stand and relive the details of what she witnessed. As a result, that district attorney also entered into a plea negotiation that resulted in a third-degree murder charge. He was sentenced to 2 third-degree murder counts instead of what could have and should have been a death penalty case. Because of that, Christy has been forced to come before the parole board through my office, the Office of Victim Advocate, and plead with the parole board year after year to not release this individual back into the community. Christy has since gone on to become a federal prosecutor. She currently works with the CIA in Langley, Virginia, and was just informed by my office that her father did walk out of prison on Saturday. Because of that information, as you can imagine, she is re-traumatized all over again. The threat to her safety is real. It is evident. She wanted to be here. She does plan to speak out in other forums regarding what she's experienced. She did join me on a radio program this morning, but she just didn't have it in her to get in the vehicle and drive from Arlington here today. As you can imagine, it's incredibly traumatizing. But Christy is the epitome of why we need Marsy's Law in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. As a 13-year-old witness to a brutal, brutal assassination and a double homicide, she should have been given the right to testify. She should have, at the very least, been given the right to motion the court and ask the judge for consideration. Marsy's Law would have given her that right. We are very fortunate that at the last minute, a wonderful survivor was able to come and share her story. I've known Angela Quarles for, I believe, 17 years. I employed her at the Victim Witness Assistance Program in Dauphin County, where she was an amazing victim advocate. And then I walked into a homicide response one morning at the hospital, and to my complete demise, I saw that Angela was the survivor of her goddaughter who was murdered. And then Angela was thrust into the criminal justice system as a crime victim. She is here today to share her experience and her strength to talk about why Marsy's Law is so important. So I want to thank you for being here at such short notice and for your strength.
Good morning, and thank you, Jen. Thank you once again for being that pillar and being that strength and being the voice for victims across the Commonwealth and across the United States. As Jen said, my name is Angela Quarles. I am before you today with a heavy, humble, but hope-filled heart. 6 years ago, my goddaughter, who was an angel here on earth, was murdered. She was murdered by her husband, the father to her 2 youngest children, while they were in the home, sleeping in the next room. Tarina was an educator. She was a mother, a daughter, a friend. She was very loving, very caring. She was those things even to the man who took her life. Yes, Tarina was killed by her husband, the father of her children, in the most cruel and horrific way. On that horrible night, life of all who knew and loved her changed forever. She is now an angel in heaven. Tarina was a victim of domestic violence. It wasn't the typical domestic violence that you see. You see bruises, you see scarring. It was the silent killer of domestic violence. It was the emotional abuse, the psychological abuse, the diminishing her to nothing in her mind, in her body, and in her soul, disconnecting her from anybody and everybody that knew her and loved her. He took that power over her. 2 weeks before her death, Tarina took her power back. She began to take those steps to be who she knew she needed to be. And then 2 weeks later, he showed her who had the power. By stabbing her 27 times, as if that wasn't enough. And then as she lay on the ground defenseless, shooting her in her eye. Had it not been for the advocacy we received from Jen Storm and the Dauphin County Victim Witness Assistance Office, the fierce prosecution by Jen Gettle in the Dauphin County District Attorney's Office, I'm not sure that I'd be standing here before you to share my story. They gave us a seat at the table. They gave us a voice when the system didn't. And Jen, she continues to work tirelessly to ensure victims' rights at least are equal to those who commit such horrendous crimes. In theory, a victim has a right to sit at the table, to have a voice, In theory, a victim has some say-so in the prosecution process of the perpetrator that has rendered their lives to nothing or near nothing. You see, through the criminal court process, it may appear on the outside a victim has a voice, has a say-so, but in reality, in the shoes of a victim, we really don't. In reality, we, and when I say we, I mean victims and survivors, we sit back and are reminded over and over again, every step of the way, of the many, and I repeat, many rights of the accused and the convicted. Marsy's Law for All seeks to amend state constitutions that don't offer protections, and eventually the U.S. Constitution, to give victims of crime equal rights that are already afforded to the accused and convicted. Marsy's Law for All will allow a victim not only a seat at the table, but to be seen. Not only a voice, but to be heard. The law will ensure victims have the same co-equal rights as the accused and convicted. Nothing more, nothing less. However, completely what is right, what is humane, what would be constitutionally sound. Marsy's Law for All allows a victim to have constitutional rights about decisions that are being made about the horrific crime that has shattered and changed their lives forever. We, and again, we means victims and survivors, will be seen at the table. Through Marsy's Law for All, we will be heard. Our pain will matter, our loss truly felt, our journey to healing made a bit more smooth simply by having equal rights, having equality. Please, I ask that you realize the tremendous impact of this law, that this law will have on the rights of victims, rights that are far overdue. I stand before you on behalf of all victims and survivors, and we thank you. We appreciate your time, your attention, and your support.
Thank you so very much. Your strength and your resiliency is why we're here today. And I know you stand with several survivors who are here today who I'm sure can echo the words that you have just spoken, so thank you so much. I'm so proud to announce our prime sponsor of this initiative in the House, Representative Sheryl Delozier. She is currently serving her 5th term in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives and is a member of the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. Prior to her election, she worked in the Auditor General's office before she served on Governor Tom Ridge's transition team. She continued to serve as senior staff for 8 years of the Ridge and Schweiker administrations. She completed her tenure in the administration as director of Governor Mark Schweiker's Office of Public Liaison. In addition, Sheryl also serves as an advisor to a commissioner at the PUC. She also serves as a champion of victims' rights in the House, and we're very fortunate to have her on this bill.
Thank you, Jen. Well, I really don't know how I can say it any better than what was just said, because as you can tell, the passion of those that this bill will affect is certainly something that we need to harness and take it as we move through this process. But I want to thank you all for being here to be an advocate for victims. It's an honor to be the prime sponsor of Marsy's Law in the House, House Bill 1993. Most of you probably know that I have advocated for victims' rights and the voice of the victim for many years. And in fact, this is the 3rd straight session where I have sponsored bills on restitution that have passed through the House, and we await action in the Senate. Victims should not be treated as second-class citizens. All crime victims deserve to be dealt with fairness and dignity, as was just mentioned. They are not asked to be in this system. They are thrown into this system by an action of another. Too many times, victims like Christy Lane, like the goddaughter we just heard about, that leave behind family and leave behind people that love them. They're re-victimized every time they go through the criminal justice process. She and her fellow victims are why it's past time for Marsy's Law. It's time to move on the protections for victims now. The public today is much more aware of the difficulty and uncertainty victims and their families face when they come forward to seek justice. Everyone wants justice. They come forward to get it, and so many times they feel they don't. I stand here today to tell you that today is the day to start. Give that process and give those rights to our victims of crime in the state of Pennsylvania. Senator Rauschenthaler's bill and my companion piece would require that the Commonwealth protect the victim's rights no less vigorously than that of the accused. Many times, diligent district attorneys will care about the victims and already do many of the things outlined. And as Jen mentioned, statutorily, they will comply. But however, some things fall through the cracks. And it's not anyone's fault, it just happens. But we need it to be a right so that it doesn't happen again. We never forget to notify a defendant about a court matter because it's required. Victims should not be treated any differently. Instead of a courtesy, it should be a requirement. The constitutional amendment is the only way to ensure that victims enjoy equal footing with the accused, and the only way to ensure that victims have some kind of redress when their rights are violated. Unfortunately, crime statutory rights do not rise, as Jen mentioned, to the level of constitutional guarantee, not only in the U.S. Constitution, but in 15 states, and we've mentioned that, but I think it bears repeating, because 15 states still need action. Amending the Pennsylvania Constitution is a lengthy process. As was mentioned by the Senator, 2 terms, consecutive, has to be in place. We have to work it through the system, and we are willing to do that. And we have our fellow legislators that are here. I have 2 from the House. This is not a session day, so I really appreciate our Majority Whip, Representative Cutler and Representative Corbin, that are here to be with us today to say we are the voice for victims. And I understand that it will take a few years before our voters can decide if crime victims should have guaranteed rights on the ballot. But we will keep pushing, and we will make sure that they have that option and they have the chance to make that vote. Perhaps when the rights of victims are just put on equal footing with the rights of those that committed a crime, the crime against them, people will think twice about engaging in criminal activity. I stand here today to urge you to encourage your elected leaders and follow the community members and support this constitutional change. Those that you elect to represent you, let them hear your voice, and please continue to be that voice for victims. We're all here to be that voice. There are many of others that are out there that I know want to be, and I ask you to continue and make sure you talk to your elected officials and tell them how important this is and why we need to do it now. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Next, I have the privilege of introducing Senator Jay Costa, who is the Senate Democratic leader. He has also been a staunch advocate for victims' rights in his time in the Senate. Senator Costa is serving his 5th full term in the Pennsylvania Senate and was elected Democratic leader in 2010. A lifelong Pittsburgh resident, Senator Costa previously served as deputy sheriff in Allegheny County and the Allegheny County Register of Wills. Senator Costa has been an advocate for victims, as I indicated, and his legislative record features signature laws in the areas of family law, judicial reform, public safety, among others. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jen, very much. Thank you all very much for being here, particularly our victims and our victim advocates and so many other folks, to really talk about this very, very important piece of legislation, this constitutional amendment, that it's appropriate for Pennsylvania to be taking this steps, and I applaud everyone for being part of today's conversation. And this conversation is mentioned by Representative that we need to take back to the community, making certain that our folks in the communities and the neighborhoods all across Pennsylvania understand the importance of elevating victims' rights to be on par with other types of rights that are guaranteed under our Constitution. And I would applaud Senator Rauschenthaler as well as Representative Delozier. I knew I was going to screw it up when I came up here. But in any event, thank them for the work that's being done, because it really is important. And I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that there are a number of my colleagues from the Senate who are here today. I think it represents the bipartisan nature of this important issue that needs to be addressed as soon as we can. As I look to my right, I'll start from my right, Senator Mario Scavello, Senator Scott Martin, Senator Kim Ward, Senator John Sabatina. Over to my left, I know Senator Rafferty is here, John Rafferty, Mike Regan, Senator Rethenshaller, Senator Cameron Bartolotta. I think Senator Baker's here as well. And I'm not sure if I missed anyone, I apologize, but the point I'm trying to make is that there are a number of us who are here today standing before you, making certain that we take the steps that are necessary to put our victims' rights on par, on equal footing with those of our defendants and those individuals in the conversation about criminal justice. When we talk here, and there's been a lot of talk around this Commonwealth and around this country about criminal justice reform, in my mind, this needs to be part of that discussion. Victims' rights need to be part. The equal footing that they need to be provided under our Constitution need to be part of the criminal justice reforms as we talk about as we go forward. So I'm very happy to be here. I want to thank everyone for being here, most importantly, and certainly the two sponsors for the work that they're doing on this legislation. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you very much. As victim advocates, the work that we do goes hand in hand with the Pennsylvania District Attorneys. Without them, our jobs would be much more challenging. It is incredibly fortunate that in Pennsylvania we have a wonderful Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association who stands up for victims, who stands out for victims, and who's fully supporting Marsy's law. Today to speak on their behalf is Craig Stedman, the Lancaster County District Attorney. However, we do have several elected district attorneys with us today that I know he'll be acknowledging. Craig Stedman serves as the Lancaster District Attorney, where he launched the Lancaster County Elder Abuse Protection Unit and Task Force and the Special Victims Unit. He also serves on the executive board of the Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association and previously served as a Special Assistant United States Attorney and served as an officer in the United States Army Reserve. Craig Stedman, please.
Thank you, Jen. Good morning. As she said, my name is Craig Stedman. I'm the District Attorney in Lancaster County. I'm here on behalf of the Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association. I'm incredibly pleased to be here with my fellow DAs, Dave Arnold from Lebanon, Dave Sunday from York, Fran Chardo from Dauphin, Kevin Steele from Montgomery County, and Gene Vitone from Washington. You know, it's an honor to be here with our advocates as well, our legislators, and above all, our victims. But it's also sobering and humbling to know that we're here especially because of those that we've lost. Those who have been forever altered, sometimes shattered by crime. You know, we hear about the numbers of victims that we have in Pennsylvania and across the country, and we know that those victims come to us, the prosecutors, seeking justice. So we strive to hold offenders accountable and also making our communities safer. But there's more to it than that. We stand up for victims to help them achieve a measure of both justice and closure. We do this because victimization is not just about statistics, how many were robbed, how many were victims of assault. It's about real people. People who do not deserve what happened to them. So what do victims want? They want to be safe. They want to be made whole. They want their wounds healed, their property restored, and they want the defendant held accountable, and they want to be heard. In Pennsylvania, we have a robust Crimes Victim Act that provides significant protections to our victims. That act, along with the work of our advocates, has helped ensure that our victims have information and protections. Unfortunately, the simple truth is that the protections we have are not uniformly enforced and do not always achieve the intended results. And that's why we're here. To ensure the foundation for victim rights in Pennsylvania is as strong as it needs to be, as strong as it should be. Now, no speech can convey the pain, the loss, the suffering that so many have endured at the hands of criminals. No law school class I went to prepared me for the true impact of crime and how to look in the eyes of victims and survivors and tell them what happened to their loved one. Yet all too often, our adversarial system seems to be only about the defendant and the defendant's rights. We've done trials in which days and weeks go by without a mention of the victim, and we're murder trials, and we're instead focused on the defendant's rights, the right to counsel, the Fourth, Fifth, Sixth Amendment, what have you. All those rights are appropriately protected by our Constitution. But you know what? Foundation of our country is liberty and justice. And the number one right is the right to safety, the right to live your life free from crime without being a victim. Quite simply, people have a right to live, to work, to raise their family without fear of burglary, assault, robbery, or worse. And that is the foundation of liberty. Victims of those crimes absolutely deserve strong voice in the courtroom, and that is a foundation of justice. And so, when we act on victim rights and we promote liberty and justice, not just for the victim, but for the entire state. And to really do that, victims need their own constitutional protections so they can be on the same level as their offenders, equal status under the law. And the rights we're talking about, they just make sense. The right to have notice, to be heard, to be present, the right to restitution, and the ability to assert those rights. Victims and their families put their trust in us, the prosecutors, at the worst times in their lives. Many of them will always remember being a victim and at the mercy of their offender. So we simply must have a system which honors and respects those who have suffered and those who have endured. They, in turn, can have the choice, the chance, the power, the voice to say, if they will, I am no longer your victim here today, and here is what I have to say. With this amendment, those words will finally resonate throughout our courtrooms, bolstered not only by liberty and justice, but also, for the first time, by our Constitution. There's a provision at the beginning of the proposed amendment that says the victim shall have the right to be treated with fairness and respect for the victim's safety. That provision is not merely aspirational. It is the entire point. Fairness and respect. Thank you, Senator Reschenthaler and Representative Delozier, for leading the efforts on Marsy's law. By taking the lead, by standing with victims and their advocates, you've shown enormous fairness and respect to victims, and will finally give them the power and the voice they deserve. Thank you very much.
Thank you again. I want to again just acknowledge the amazing survivors that are here with us today, the legislators, the law enforcement officials, the district attorneys. As you can see, this is a collaborative movement. As you also heard, this is going to be a long journey. A constitutional amendment takes time. What we're asking is that you find it in your heart to reach out to your legislator, to educate yourself on Marsy's law, but to understand and appreciate that it's not just Marsy's law that we're trying to pass. It's for Thomas, it's for Angela, it's for Karen, it's for Kim, it's for every survivor and victim of crime that you know. It's their stories that we want you to take forth and help to understand that this law is going to change the experience and lives of victims coming forward. We appreciate your time. There will be individuals here for questions and answers and also interviews if you would like that. So thank you very much.
Marsy.